Hey guys! If this is your first time to my channel, hello and welcome. My name is Emily. Thank you so much for being here, and today I am bringing you another Mad Science makeup. So, what do we think of that intro? Kind of corny? Kind of cheesy? I don't know. I like it, and one of my subscribers suggested to me that I should actually get a science lab coat and do something kind of cute like that, but I don't have one of those on hand. Believe it or not, I'm not a real mad scientist, so I improvised. So if it's kind of corny, feel free to let me know, but I like it, so I'm gonna probably keep it. But today's video is a brand new Mad Science makeup where I have actually made the shade Beam from the new Venus 3 palette. And I do have some comparable shades that I'm going to show later in the video for some of the shades in the palette as well. But if you want to see how I was able to make this bad boy, then just keep on watching. So you know what time it is by the setup. Obviously, we are hopping right back into Mad Science makeup. I feel like I haven't done one of these in so freaking long, and I feel bad. I feel like this is a series that not only do I enjoy doing, but I've gotten some good feedback about it, so I'm sorry that I haven't really done it in a couple weeks. I think it's probably only been like 2 weeks, but I try to do this one every single week. As you can tell, today we are working with some purpley tones. Today I am going to be trying to recreate a specific shade from the new Limecrime Venus 3 palette. Now, I absolutely adore Limecrime's formula. I really, truly love it. It's one of my favorite formulas that I've ever used, but Limecrime can be a little bit questionable at times. They have recently just come out with the Venus 3 palette. And this palette has some purpley tones in it, and it also has some mauve tones as well as some kind of cooler tone browns. So I knew that I didn't need to buy this palette because I'm not into cool tone browns and I'm not super into purples or mauves. But there are certain times when I do like to wear purples. So one shade that really called to me was the shade Beam. And it's absolutely stunning. It's like this beautiful, light, iridescent-y, bluish, pinky duochrome shade. And I really want to try and recreate that here today. It's absolutely stunning, but I really don't need the whole palette for a couple of shades, and I picked out some in my collection that I will be showing later that to me look pretty similar to the ones in the Limecrime palette. But let's go ahead and jump right on in to trying to replicate the shade Beam from the Venus 3 palette. So to start off today, I am using my handy dandy depotting spatula, my little mixing tray here. Just recently found this tiny little Stila mixing medium that comes in this tiny little dropper, and the mixing medium was completely dried out. Like, it was literally like glue on the sides of this bottle. So I cleaned it out, and I'm using this for rubbing alcohol now. So it's just a tiny, tiny little dropper, and it'll really help me to control how much rubbing alcohol I'm putting into the product that I am making. I think that it's just so little and so cute. Next up, I'm going to be taking from this old school Stila Magnificent Metals pot. This is in the shade Metallic Dusty Rose. This was the original product that they had on the market before the liquid glitter and glows came out. It was in a pot formula, and I'll swatch it out here so we can see what it looks like. It's just a kind of icy, pinky, glittery finish, and it's like a cream shadow almost. It kind of reminds me of the Colourpop shadows, but not really. This is a lot chunkier, a lot more flaky, and a lot more glittery. So the purple shade that I am going to be taking from today is the shade Subdue from the Element of Surprise palette by Colourpop. I've used this in a Mad Science makeup before, and it's described as a metallic dusty lavender with a green flip. I've never really seen that green flip, but let me swatch it for you. And there we have Subdue. Next up here we have Coastal Senses Peach Fuzz. This is like a kind of shimmery, peachy shade. I'm not really sure if I'm going to be reaching into this today, but if I need to add some more pinkiness to the product, then I have this on hand to do so. And the last little pan that I have here is the shade Forever Lit from the Anastasia Beverly Hills and Nicole Guerrero Glow Kit. This is like an icy, kind of bluish white highlighter shade. And I would never really use this on my cheeks because it's way too stark white for me, but I really like mixing this with some of the products that I've used in Mad Science makeup or when I'm just bored and making products at home. I really like this for lightening things up and adding a bit more sheen to them. And last but certainly not least, I would say this is the most important product, which is the empty pan that I'm going to be popping the product into once we are all done here. Alright, well let's go ahead and get started, shall we? So this shade is obviously pretty purple. So I'm going to start out with Subdue from the Element of Surprise palette, and I'm going to knock out about half of what I have here. So let's go ahead and start with just half of my product here. The Colourpop pans are pretty small, and there was already some product missing from when I've used this before in Mad Science makeup. So that's really not that much product. If I need to add more later, I absolutely will. Next up here, I am going right in to Forever Lit from the Anastasia and Nicole Guerrero Glow Kit, and let's just flake it right on out of here. And I'm going to add just a couple scoops of the product. It is a giant pan, so I don't want to get too carried away here, but the Beam shade from the Venus 3 palette looked to be pretty light in tone, so I do want to add a decent amount of the white to really kind of lighten up that initial purple shade. Okay, and now is the fun part. So I noticed that Beam did have a pretty decent amount of a pinkiness to it. It was definitely a kind of lavender duochrome shade, but it did have a pretty strong pink vibe to it. So I'm gonna go ahead and just scoop out some of this old school Stila Glitter and Glow shadow. Was it even called Glitter and Glow back then? Nope, just Magnificent Metals. The new ones are called the Stila Magnificent Metals Glitter and Glow Liquid Eyeshadows, which is one hell of a name, if I do say so myself. So I've scooped out about half the product that I have left, but as you can see, it's a pretty small amount comparatively to everything else. We've put in. I hit major pain on this a long time ago. I used to use these all the time in 2015 and in 2016, and I used to have almost every single shade in my collection, but over the years I've given them to friends, or I used a couple of them up, so I only have maybe 4 or 5 of them left in my collection. Alrighty then, I'm going to go ahead and take my little Stila dropper here, and of course this just has some rubbing alcohol in it. I'm going to fill the dropper up. This is so tiny that I'm going to really be able to control how much I'm putting in. So I basically just put in about 3 little droppers full of this little tiny Stila dropper. But as you can see, this is like a centimeter long. Literally, it's so tiny and so precious. And that mixing medium actually came with the old school Stila Magnificent Metal shadows. It was nice that they actually provided you with something to kind of mix with the product to make it more user friendly, because I mean, I was just the girl that stuck my fingers in it and popped it onto my eyes, but if you have nails, it's hard to do that. But if you're not super good with cream shadows that are more chunky, or if you don't want the product to be as chunky, providing that little mixing medium really gave the user the option to thin it out and to make it a little bit easier to use. So I like that. I like that they did that. And as you can see, we have a pretty dry product here, so I just added 1 more little dropper full of the rubbing alcohol, and let's see if we can get this to be a little bit creamier. Alright, that's looking pretty awesome so far. It's definitely giving me the lavender kind of sparkly top coat vibes, which is definitely what Beam looks like. It looks like the kind of eyeshadow that you would use on top of another eyeshadow. It looks like a more sheer toned, duochromy, lavender pinky shade that has a little bit of sparkle to it. It doesn't look like a full pigment type of shadow, you know what I mean? Those topper shadows that were really popular seem to have kind of died out, but it looks like Limecrime did put one of them in the new palette. So I'm going right back into Forever Lit, and let's just hack off a little piece of this here. I want to lighten it up just a touch and just make a little bit more product so that we fill up the pan. But as far as the color goes, I think we are pretty good. I might actually add in just a hair of Peach Fuzz by Coastal Scents, because I do want it to have a little bit more of a pinky vibe. So I'm going to add just a little tiny bit, just to kind of add some more warmth and a little bit of pinkiness to it. And let's mix. Okay, so I have mixed this all together. To me, the color looks pretty even. Everything looks nice and incorporated. It's still kind of dry, but it's still tacky enough to the point where when I put my spatula into it, it feels soft and smooth. So I really want it to be kind of thick when I place it into the pan, because it just makes it a little bit easier later on, and it helps the kind of incorporation process a little bit better. It helps the shadow to come back to life a little bit easier than it would have if this was a lot more runny. So I like it when it's about this texture. I think this is the perfect texture for when I am making eyeshadows and mixing together all of my things like a crazy person. Here's my empty pan of product. I'm just gonna go ahead and start filling her up with the shadow. And as far as the color goes, to me it looks pretty close right now. It's a little bit deeper in tone, but I know that once this dries, it will definitely lighten up a little bit. Just like everything that I do when it comes to Mad Science makeup, it always looks so much darker. And then when I actually put it on the eyes or the cheeks or whatever it may be, it ends up being quite a bit lighter. So yeah, I think it should be okay. And I'm just smoothing this out here, making sure everything looks really nice and even in the pan. So here's my little creation. I think that the color looks pretty spot on, but like I said, it's got to lighten up a little bit. So I'm just gonna let this set up overnight. Typically, I would let it set up for anywhere from 2 to 4 hours and kind of test it every couple hours or so to see if it's still tacky or not. But I'm not doing my makeup today. It is the end of the day, so my makeup is already off, and your girl's too lazy to bother putting it back on. But I will go ahead and test this on camera with you guys tomorrow, and we will see if this compares to Limecrime's Beam. So this is how it turned out. I do have it on my eyes today. As you can see, it's pretty much a nice lavender kind of shimmery metallic shade. It is a little bit glittery because of the Stila Magnificent Metals that I put in there. That stuff is a little glittery and chunky, but I think it just adds a nice little dimension to the actual shadow itself. This is 2 layers of the shadow on my eyes today, and I got a little bit of glitter fallout, of course, because there is that little bit of glitter in here, but other than that, I think it went on pretty nicely. So let's go ahead and compare my shade to the shade in the Venus 3 palette. Now, I think the shade in the Venus 3 palette is a little bit more magenta tone as opposed to mine, which seems to be more of an icy kind of lilac-y shade. But I was making this shade to fill that void in my makeup collection where I really wanted to have a kind of icy, shimmery lavender color, and I think that it turned out pretty good. I think that it's similar enough to give the same vibes that the shade in the Venus 3 palette would, and that shade in the palette was one of the only ones that really called to me other than the 2 kind of pinky mauves in the palette. And I do have some shades in my collection that are very similar in color to the shades in the Venus 3 palette. So one of the shades that looked really familiar to me in the Venus 3 palette was the shade Bliss, which seems to be kind of the deeper, warmer mauve shade in the palette. And I immediately thought of my Dose of Colors Blushing Berries palette, and this is in the shade Berry Chic, which is the lightest shade in the palette. And it's a very kind of warm-toned, dusty mauve. It's got a lot of pink to it, but it looks like the shade in the Venus 3 palette also had a lot of pink to it, so I think this one might be pretty similar in color. And I had one more shadow in my collection that I felt like really kind of resembled the shade Bliss, which is the same shade that I compared the Dose of Colors shade to. It's the warmer, deeper mauve shade. And this is the shade Mango Tango by Makeup Geek. This one is a little bit more pink and a little bit more bright than the Dose of Colors shade, but to me they're still pretty reminiscent of the shade Bliss from the Venus 3 palette. And on Limecrime's website, they describe Rapture as a soft blush with a blue iridescence to it. And this is the shade Glazed and Confused by Looxi. Now to me, the shade Rapture in the Venus 3 palette didn't look that pinky or blush toned really at all. It kind of just looked like a champagne with some iridescence in it. And this shade is basically a champagne that seems to have like a pinky, purpley flip to it. So this shade was the most reminiscent of the shade Rapture in the Venus 3 palette for me. And one of the most standout shades in the Venus 3 palette is the shade Paradise, which is that bright fuchsia shimmer shade. And Limecrime says that it also has kind of a blue iridescence to it as well. And that shade is absolutely beautiful. And to be honest, I don't have any metallics in my collection that looks even close to that. So in my collection, I found the shade La Di Da by Looxi Cosmetics, and this is obviously a matte, but I feel like the undertone of this is very similar to the shade in the Venus 3 palette. Now this is obviously not going to be shimmery or have that blue iridescence, but it is a very true purple with kind of a pinky base, so it really does give that sort of fuchsia toned effect. So I know it's not 100%, but these aren't meant to be 100%. These are just similar things in my collection that I found. This way I can convince myself that I don't need to buy the Venus 3 palette because I almost bought it and then I was like, girl, take a step back, you know you have that, and then if you want that shimmery shade, try to make it. So that's basically the whole point of this series, is that I'm just going to my collection and trying to make things that I want but don't want to buy out of things that I already own. But that is going to be wrapping up today's Mad Science makeup. If you have any suggestions or any makeup products that you'd like to see me tackle, go ahead and leave them in the comments below. I am always open to suggestions. I do hope that you consider subscribing. I am doing Mad Science makeup every single week, and I have all sorts of makeup goodness happening here on this channel. So if you are not already subscribed already and you would like to be, go ahead and hit that button down below. I hope you are having an absolutely amazing day wherever you are, and thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you next time. Bye!